They say there are places in the forest where silence isn't just silence. It's a calling. Places where the moon overlooks rivers that hold ancient secrets, and where every whisper of the wind could be the voice of something that doesn't belong in this world. It was in this hidden territory that the Nairu village lived, a people who learned to respect the invisible and fear what they couldn't explain. In the heart of this village, Ara, the shaman's daughter, was born. She was a unique, restless young woman, capable of perceiving signs that escaped even the most attentive eyes. But it was on the banks of the sacred river that her life changed forever. When she began to hear voices no one else could hear, voices that called to her, insistent as if wanting to reveal secrets that could transform the fate of her entire people. What if I told you that, by following this calling, Ara discovered something that not only challenged the village's traditions, but also the very boundary between the human world and the spirit world? This is not just a story of courage, but of choice, mystery, and revelation, a legend that echoes to this day in the waters of the river that never forgets. Before we continue, let me ask you, are you already subscribed to the channel? If not, please subscribe now, like, and comment on what you thought of this story. This will help bring this content to more people who, like you, enjoy delving into narratives full of mystery and symbolism. Now take a deep breath, because the legend of Ara de Nairu is just beginning. The forest, where Nairu's village lived, was unlike any other. Its trees were so tall they seemed to obscure the sky, and their roots intertwined as if guarding ancient secrets. The wind there didn't blow for nothing. Each breeze carried a whisper, as if the forest itself had a voice. Some said the birds didn't sing by chance, but rather announced messages from another time. And when night fell, a shroud of mystery covered everything, as if the invisible walked side by side with the living. Anyone who passed through the heart of this forest felt something strange in their chest, as if being watched closely. It wasn't just the animals that prowled silently, but also presences that couldn't be seen. The elders said that every stone, every branch, and even the waters hid watchful spirits. For the bravest, this sensation aroused curiosity. For the more cautious, it aroused fear. But no one remained indifferent, for everything there pulsed as if with a life of its own. And it was precisely this hidden life that made the forest a sacred place. Hunters didn't enter without asking permission, and children learned early to respect every corner of the territory. There were places that could not be set foot on, trails that could not be opened, and rivers that could not be crossed, not because it was impossible, but because it was dangerous to awaken what lay silent. The forest could protect, but it could also exact a heavy toll on the boldness of those who challenged it. Between twisted trunks and rivers that reflected the moon like broken mirrors, the forest seemed to tell stories without words. It was as if it held memories no one remembered anymore, but which still echoed in the darkness. And it was in this landscape of enchantment and enigma that the village of Nairu was born, surrounded by the invisible, living daily with the weight of mystery. But for those people, this was no cause for fear. It was part of life, as if destiny were sown in the shade of the trees. Nairu village stood on the banks of the great river, as if hand-picked by the spirits who shaped the land. The huts were simple, made of wood and woven straw, but they maintained a harmony that made everything seem balanced. The central fire never went out, fed day and night, a symbol of the people's unity. There, every face bore the mark of generations who learned to live in communion with the forest. Daily life in the village was full of small, almost imperceptible, yet meaningful rituals. Before fishing, a drop of drink was thrown into the river as a sign of respect. Before hunting, a short song was sung, asking forgiveness from the animal that would be killed. Children, from an early age, learned to dance imitating the movements of birds, as a way of giving thanks for the bounty. Nothing was done haphazardly. Each gesture was an invisible bridge to that which could not be seen. The elders played a central role, guardians of memory and stories that were not written down anywhere. Sitting around the campfire, they narrated ancient legends, blending reality and mystery, as if it were impossible to separate one from the other. It was in these moments that the village learned about courage, prudence, and the secrets of the river. Everyone listened in silence, knowing that in every word there was more than a lesson. There was a warning, and despite living surrounded by the enigma of the forest, the Nairu saw it not as a burden, but as a gift. They believed they were protected because they respected the boundaries imposed by the spirit. However, there were whispered stories of times when the village was nearly destroyed for breaking these rules. These were memories that lingered in the air, as if waiting for the right moment to resurface. And it was in this delicate balance that Iara, the shaman's daughter, grew up, destined to see more than others. The shaman of the Nairu village was a man of imposing presence, not because of his size, but because of the weight of his work. His voice carried the cadence of the river, slow and deep, and when he spoke, everyone stopped to listen. It was said that he could converse with the winds and decipher the signals of birds, understanding messages that went unnoticed by others. He was feared and respected, not only as a spiritual guide, but as a bridge between the visible and the invisible. Iara, his daughter, had grown up under this shadow of wisdom, admired and watched in silence by the village. Many believed she would be her father's natural successor, though she was too young for such a responsibility. Unlike the others, who ran free among the forest trails, she preferred to listen to stories and lose herself in questions no one dared ask. It was as if her eyes saw beyond what was before her, always searching for something beyond the ordinary. But being a shaman's daughter was no easy task. Iara felt a constant sense of expectation on her shoulders, as if every step were being watched, not only by the living, but also by her ancestors. Some looked at her with admiration, and others feared her, as if she held more mystery than she should bear so young. This duality was part of the young woman's life, torn between the freedom of being a child and the destiny that seemed already written for her. Even so, Iara didn't shrink from this burden. On the contrary, her curiosity grew with each story told. With each corner of the forest explored in silence, she seemed to have an invisible connection to what others only felt but didn't understand. There were moments when one could swear she heard something beyond the sound of water or the bird song, and it was precisely this sensitivity that would one day lead her to hear the voices no one else dared to hear. From a very young age, Iara displayed a unique awareness of things that escaped the common eye. While other children played among the huts, she was distracted by the movement of the smoke from the campfire, or the way the leaves slowly fell from the treetops. She seemed to perceive invisible signs, hidden in trivial details. It was as if the world spoke to her in subtle codes that only she could decipher. This sensitivity aroused curiosity among the elders, but also caused some discomfort. There were times when Iara described dreams so vivid they sounded like premonitions. Other times, she pointed to places in the forest that days later revealed unexpected game or fruit. For some it was a blessed gift, for others it was a dangerous burden that should not be tampered with. But the truth is, the young woman never seemed frightened by what she perceived. Instead, she felt a strange familiarity with something that couldn't be explained. The sound of the rushing waters in the river made her restless, as if it were an incomplete melody just waiting for someone to decipher it. There were nights when Iara would sit by the stream, gazing at the moon's reflection, as if waiting for the river to reveal a secret. It was in those moments that questions arose that no one else dared to ask. To many it was just a curious girl's imagination, but deep down, some elders knew there was something more. Iara had been born with a perception that surpassed the ordinary, as if she carried within her a dormant calling. And little by little, this calling would begin to reveal itself more intensely, leading her to hear voices that belonged neither to the world of the living, nor to the silence of the forest. The river that ran through the Nairu village wasn't seen simply as flowing water. It was treated as a guardian, a portal between worlds. Its banks were covered with smooth ancient stones, some bearing markings that looked like inscriptions made by invisible hands. During the day, the sun's reflection transformed its waters into golden mirrors, but it was at night that the river revealed its most enigmatic face. The moon, when full, seemed to rest entirely upon it, as if trying to hide in its depth. No resident approached the river without first performing rituals of respect. Before casting their nets, fishermen would leave small offerings, feathers, seeds, or even strands of hair. It was believed that whatever was taken from the river needed to be returned in another form, so that the balance would not be broken. There were stories of those who ignored this custom, and were swept away by the waters, disappearing without a trace. These memories lingered like silent warning for the elders. The river was the home of the spirits that sustained the village's life. Many believed that entities lived there, deciding the fate of crops, hunts, and even the health of children. The shaman said the river had ears, that every word uttered upon its waters carried beyond the visible. Therefore, everyone spoke softly along its banks, as if any sound might awaken something that should remain silent. Yara, however, seemed to hear the river different. While others saw only current and foam, she felt a different vibration, as if something were hidden, waiting to be discovered. It was as if the river had a special call, directed only to her. And although she couldn't explain it, the young woman sensed that those waters held secrets that could change not only her life, but the history of the entire village. One night, as the wind rustled the leaves, and the river flowed in profound silence, Yara heard something different. It wasn't the sound of the current, nor the croaking of frogs hidden among the rocks. It was a soft whisper, almost like a drawn-out song, that seemed to originate from the waters themselves. At first, she thought it was just a figment of her imagination, but each time she returned to the riverbank, the sound became clearer, like a voice insisting on being heard. The strangest thing was that no one else seemed to note. Fishermen passed by, hunters crossed the shore, and everyone acted as if nothing was unusual. But for Yara, that melody sounded ever clearer, as if the waters were calling only to her. It was a mysterious invitation, a call that provoked both fear and curiosity. And deep inside, something told her it wasn't safe to ignore. The voices spoke in fragments, words that dissolved into the current before she could fully understand them. Sometimes they sounded like distant wails. Other times, they sounded like children's laughter hidden in the foam. The sound changed with the moon, louder on full nights, quieter on waning moons. Each variation seemed to carry a message, as if the river were testing the young woman's patience, waiting for the moment when she would find the courage to follow its call. Yara began to wonder if those voices were a gift or a trap. She knew stories of people who had disappeared while following strange sounds in the woods or in the water, but at the same time, she felt the river was revealing something to her that no one else could perceive. And it was in this silent conflict that her life began to transform, for what seemed like a mere whisper was about to become an enigma impossible to ignore. In the village, the river had always been a source of both reverence and fear, but when rumors began that Yara was hearing voices, an uneasy silence spread among the residents. Some whispered around the campfires, saying the young woman had been chosen by the spirits. Others claimed it was a sign of a curse. The fear lay not only in the mystery of the waters, but in what might happen if anyone dared to answer this invisible call. The elders soon recalled ancient tales, kept as warnings. They said that many moons ago, curious young men had also heard similar voices, and upon following them, were never seen again. Their names were erased from the village's memory, as if they had crossed a line, never to be crossed. These legends gained strength, and every glance Yara cast carried both fascination and fear. Even the children, who had previously run free around her, began to watch her from afar. It wasn't contempt, but a mixture of respect and distrust, as if something in her presence had changed. Each night when the waters whispered, the residents retired earlier, avoiding even meeting their gazes with the river's reflection. The village seemed to want to protect itself, not only from the mystery, but also from Yara, and yet the young woman was unfazed by this climate of distrust. Within her, the uneasiness only grew, as if the call were stronger than any warning or collective fear. It was as if the river were weaving an inevitable destiny, and Yara, even surrounded by suspicious gazes, felt there was no escaping what was to come. Yara lived torn between two invisible forces. On one hand, respect for the village's traditions. On the other, the curiosity that burned within her like fire. She knew that following the voices could mean defying customs, and even betraying her own father's teaching. But at the same time, each night made it impossible to ignore the call that echoed within her heart. It was as if something was pushing her toward the river, even when she tried to resist. The dilemma grew silent. When she lay in her hammock, she closed her eyes, and could still hear the murmur of the waters, as if it were an endless song. Sleep came, but always burdened with strange dreams, full of symbols that seemed to hide answers. When she woke, the feeling persisted,
leaving her restless. Not even the stories of the elders could dispel the certainty that something was waiting for her. There were times when she considered revealing everything to her father, hoping to find a way out, advice or perhaps an order that would free her from the weight of this choice. But something held her back, the fear of being told to forget, to silence her own essence. Deep down she knew this decision couldn't be anyone else's. It was a burden only she could bear. Thus Yara walked through the village as if guarding a huge seat. On the outside, she was the same young woman, the shaman's daughter, but inside, her soul was already in motion, restless like the waters that called to her. And little by little, the feeling that she could not avoid the encounter became inevitable. Sooner or later, she would have to choose, obey the voices of tradition, or the voices of the river. That night, the sky was darker than usual, clouds covered the moon, and only a few stars managed to slip through the gaps. The wind blew coldly, bringing a heavy silence into the village. Yara, lying in her hammock, felt her heart pounding, as if her own body were pushing her out of the hut. It was as if the river had chosen that moment to finally demand her presence. She got up quietly, careful not to wake anyone. Her footsteps were light, almost as if they weren't touching the ground. With each step toward the river, the sound of voices grew clearer, more insistent, as if they were calling her name. Yara knew she was crossing an invisible line, but she felt as if she didn't do it now, she would never have another chance. There was an inexplicable urgency in the air. The forest seemed to accompany her on this silent journey. The trees bent like witnesses, and the sound of branches snapping sounded like ancient whispers. Even the nocturnal animals seemed withdrawn, as if respecting the path she was taking. With each step, the young woman felt her heart mingling with fear and courage, as if both were necessary to face what lay ahead. When she reached the shore, the current reflected only fragments of the moon between the clouds. The voices now sounded closer, clearer, almost human. Yara took a deep breath, the thick night air entering her lungs, as if it were the final warning before the crossing. And standing before that sacred river, she knew there was no turning back. The decision had been made, and the encounter was about to happen. Yara approached the riverbank with slow steps, barely breathing, as if afraid to scare away whatever was calling her. The current seemed more alive than ever, undulating in movements reminiscent of silent dance. When she knelt to look closer, the surface of the water reflected her face, mingled with something strange, a silhouette that wasn't hers, but stared at her with deep shining eyes. Suddenly, the water stirred without any weight. A figure emerged, half human, half spirit, shaped by the current itself. Its skin had the silvery glow of the moon, and its hair glided like dark seaweed. The creature spoke without ordinary words, but its presence communicated a truth that Yara could feel directly in her soul. It was an encounter that did not belong to the world of men, but neither was it merely a dream. The young woman remained motionless, torn between amazement and fascination. Those eyes pierced her, as if probing every hidden thought, every guarded secret. The fear, which had previously seemed so strong, began to mix with a strange sense of recognition, as if somehow she had already known this encounter would one day happen. It was like seeing something that had always been waiting for her. The being's voice echoed, not in the air, but within Yara's mind, like a chant vibrating in every part of her body. They weren't complete sentences, but riddles, fragmented words, metaphors that begged for interpretation. The river spoke through the entity, offering answers that were always accompanied by new mysteries. And faced with that apparition, Yara understood that her life would never be the same. The entity that emerged from the waters didn't present itself direct. Its words were like fragments of an ancient song, laden with symbols and metaphors. The river holds the memory of what was forgotten, and demands what was never paid. With each sentence, Yara sensed a hidden meaning, as if she were faced with a puzzle that could only be understood at the cost of courage. It wasn't a simple revelation. It was an invitation to delve into something much greater. As she watched, Yara noticed that the waters around the figure moved in circles, creating ephemeral patterns that resembled maps or signs. Sometimes animal shapes appeared, sometimes human faces, dissolved into foam. It was as if the river were showing her fragments of her people's history, but without providing clear answers. This required her not only to listen, but also to interpret. With each riddle posed, the young woman's mind was filled with doubts, and at the same time, A strange sense of certainty. The stories she had heard from the elders gained new layers, revealing that the village might not be the fruit of human strength alone, but the result of a hidden pact. The being's voice spoke of ancient promises, of unpaid debts, and of a destiny about to be fulfilled. Yara, even though frightened, didn't look away. Each word echoed within her like a call, stirring memories she hadn't even known she possessed. She felt she wasn't just being told a secret, she was being chosen to carry it. And deep down, she understood that this revelation wasn't just for her, but for the entire village. Though she wasn't sure her people were ready to face this truth, the spirit's words brought to light a secret buried by time. The Nairu village had not been born by chance. Ancient leaders, in distant eras, made a pact with the river's guardians. In exchange for protection and abundance, they offered silence and obedience. They were never to attempt to decipher the voices, nor to seek beyond what the river allowed. It was an invisible agreement, sealed not with weapons, but with the very essence of the community. The spirit revealed that the balance between the living and those who inhabited the waters was breaking. The Nairu had forgotten the depth of the pact, living as if it were merely legend. With each carelessly performed ritual, with each tradition left behind, the harmony was further unraveled. And now, the river cried out for a living reminder, someone to restore awareness of this bond. Yara listened attentively, her heart heavy. The elders' stories, once seen as warnings, took on new color. They weren't just tales, they were veiled memories of a contract that should never be broken. The secret, which until then seemed buried in the mists of the past, now revealed itself, like an open wound ready to... And she, without asking, had been chosen to see what no one else could. The young woman understood that this knowledge was both a gift and a curse. Carrying such a revelation meant changing the fate of the village, even if it cost her own people. The waters gave her no choice. They simply delivered the weight of the truth, and in that moment, Yara realized she would have to decide whether to keep the secret alone or expose it, facing the consequences that could forever change the future of her people. With the secret echoing in her mind, Yara felt the weight of a decision that seemed bigger than herself. If she remained silent, she would be protecting the village from the shock of an ancient truth, but she would also be condemning her people to repeat mistakes already looming in the present. On the other hand, if she revealed what she had heard, she could shake the Nairu's entire trust in their beliefs, and in their own shaman, her father. It was a dilemma that trapped her like an invisible net. The voices continued to haunt her thoughts, reminding her that time was short. The river wouldn't wait forever for her choice. With each dawn, Yara saw signs that the balance was breaking. Fish becoming scarcer, trees drying up in unlikely places, hunting becoming more difficult. It was as if the forest, too, was waiting for her decision, urging her to act before it was too late. Within her, the conflict grew stronger. Her heart told her to share the truth, but fear of the village's reaction paralyzed her. How could she explain that the river guardians were demanding a forgotten pact? How could she convince the elders that her stories were not just memories, but urgent warnings? Yara knew she wouldn't be easily heard, especially as a young woman, amidst so many rigid traditions. In that agonizing silence, she realized there was no easy choice. Either path would bring harsh consequences, and both could be costly. But amidst her doubt, a certainty grew within her. The river had not chosen her by chance, and sooner or later, she would have to decide what price she was willing to pay. Keep the secret, or face the entire village with the truth. Yara spent days in silence, carrying the secret, like someone holding fire in their hands, until one night, she could bear it no longer. She sought out her father, the shaman, as he fed the central fire with herbs that released blue smoke. His eyes reflected the flame, and standing before him, Yara felt her heart race. With a trembling voice, she told him about the voices, the encounter at the river, and the forgotten pact. The words poured out like overflowing rivers, impossible to contain. The shaman listened to her, without interrupting, his face motionless, but his eyes too deep to hide. When she finished, he took a deep breath, and closed his eyes, as if carrying the weight of centuries. Then he revealed something he had never confessed. He too knew part of this secret. The ancient elders had told him about it when he took office, warning him never to allow anyone to get too close to the voices. For Yara, the revelation was a shock. Her own father knew, yet he had remained silent for all those years. The young woman felt torn between indignation and understanding. After all, perhaps he too was caught in the same dilemma that now consumed her. The shaman, however, tried to convince her that the village was not ready, that addressing the issue could bring ruin rather than salvation, but the fire within her refused to be extinguished. Yara saw, in her father's eyes, the same fear that gripped and she understood, in that moment, that if she depended solely on her elders, the secret would remain buried. What set her apart was precisely her courage to face what everyone else preferred to forget, and even in the face of the shaman's own resistance, she felt she needed to take the next step. When the first rumors spread through the village, the mood changed, like a sudden wind. Some believed Yara had been touched by the river spirits and saw her as a chosen. Others, however, regarded her with fear, as if her presence were an omen of doom. Between suspicious glances and hushed whispers, the village was divided, and Yara walked in the center of this tension, silently bearing the weight of others' interpretation. The older women whispered as they weaved baskets, recalling stories of curses brought by young men who dared to overhear what they shouldn't. The hunters, in turn, began to avoid her, fearing that her mere proximity would scare away their hunting fortune. Even the children, who had once run around her, now kept their distance, watching her with curious, frightened eyes, as if she were part of the forest itself. At the same time, there were those who secretly defended her. Some young people were inspired by her courage, admiring the way she faced the invisible, without shying away. The wiser ones recognized that even in the face of fear, Yara demonstrated the strength of someone who hears what others ignore. It was as if she were at once the threat and the hope of the village, the flame that could both illuminate and set fire to everything around her. The shaman, aware of the growing division, tried to pacify the people, urging calm and respect, but it was too late. The village was in a state of unrest, as if a great event were about to unfold. Yara, even in silence, realized that her mere existence had changed the order of things, and although she didn't say it aloud, she felt the river still calling her, as if waiting for her return. That early morning, the silence of the village seemed denser than usual. Yara, lying in her hammock, felt the call echoing within her, like a distant, insistent drum. There was no longer any way to ignore it. She got up slowly, taking a deep breath, and walked alone along the trail lit only by the pale light of the moon. The forest, at that moment, didn't seem threatening. It was as if it were opening a path for her to follow toward the inevitable. Each step was accompanied by sounds that resembled signals: the rustling of leaves, the brief call of a nocturnal bird, the dry snap of a twig. Yara perceived them all as messages, reminders that she was not walking alone. As she approached the river, her heart pounded, for she could now clearly hear the voices. They were no longer distant whispers. They were calling her name, clearly. As she reached the shore, the moon's reflection trembled in the current, as if inviting her. The waters rippled gently, creating concentric circles that seemed to pulse, in sync with her breathing. Yara knelt and touched the cool surface. It was in that instant that a sense of belonging washed over her. It was as if she were finally where she was always meant to. The river recognized her, and she recognized the river. There, amid the murmur of the waters and the solitude of the night, Yara understood that the encounter was not merely a whim of the spirits. It was a destiny unfolding, beckoning her to take the next step without returning to the river was not an end, but the beginning of something much greater, a link that connected her life to the secret the village was trying to forget, and somehow, she knew she would not leave the same way she arrived. When Yara touched the waters again, something different happened. A cold current coursed through her body, but it wasn't just cold, it was energy, as if her veins were filling with liquid light. Her eyes closed by themselves, and a vision took over her mind. She saw ancient Nairu and rituals by the river, offering chants and blood, sealing invisible pact. It was as if her people's entire past had been poured into her in a single instant.
Her body trembled, but not from fear. Her skin seemed to vibrate, and subtle marks began to appear on her arms, patterns resembling waves and spirals, like tattoos made by the water itself. Each line glowed for a few seconds before fading, leaving only the sensation that they were etched within her, not externally. It was the river marking its chosen one, sealing a bond that could never be undone. At the height of the experience, Yara opened her eyes and saw the entity again. But now it wasn't just an apparition. It was part of her. The voice no longer came from outside, but from within. The words echoed in her heart, as if they were her own memories. You are a bridge. You are a guardian. You are part of the river. Those words weren't a request. They were a sentence. Yara was no longer just the shaman's daughter. She was something new. When the current calmed, she fell to her knees on the bank, panting. She felt the same, and yet completely different. The world around her seemed clearer, as if every sound and smell carried a hidden meaning. The river had given her a gift, or perhaps a curse, and now she could not turn back. The transformation was complete, and her destiny had changed forever. The next morning, when Iara returned to the village, her presence did not go unnoticed. The young woman's eyes held a different glow, as if they reflected more than just sunlight. Some looked at her with admiration, others with fear, but everyone sensed that something had changed. The transformation wasn't just visible in her posture. The atmosphere around her seemed to carry a force no one could explain. The hunters noticed first. The game, which had been scarce, was once again approaching the trails. The fishermen, casting their nets, found fish in abundance, unlike anything they had seen in a long time. The women, gathering fruit, noticed that previously dry trees were showing signs of life again. It was as if the forest had responded to Iara's transformation, restoring balance to the village. But along with the abundance, fear also grew. The elders gathered in silence, debating whether this was a blessing or a danger. Some saw in Iara the confirmation of an ancient prophecy, believing she was the link between the people and the river spirit. Others, more fearful, said she had crossed a forbidden line, and that her presence could bring even greater punishments. The village lived then between the relief of abundance and the anguish of uncertainty. Iara walked among them, aware of the stares and whispers, but she didn't back down. She knew her transformation hadn't been a choice, but fate. And even though she didn't have all the answers, she realized the river had brought life back to the village, in exchange for charging her with the responsibility of carrying the secret. The impact had been made, and nothing would ever be the same again. As the days passed, Iara began to drift further and further away from the village routine. She no longer found herself among the other young women, weaving baskets or participating in the dance. It was as if something inside her constantly called her back to the river. Her time with the people grew brief, while the nights by the water grew longer. Many said she no longer fully belonged to the world of men. There were those who believed that Iara had become the guardian of the river, chosen to mediate the pact between the spirits and the village. Others claimed that sooner or later, she would disappear into the waters, like the ancients who had followed the voice. And indeed, her presence began to become rarer, always silent, always serene, but with a distant gaze, as if she could already see horizons that others could not. Some children swore they saw her walk along the shore without leaving footprints, as if she were made of mist. Others said they heard her voice mingling with the sound of the current, singing melodies that belonged to no known song. With each account, Iara's image became a legend even in her lifetime. She was no longer just the shaman's daughter, but a living mystery before everyone. And then, one silent morning, Iara was simply no longer in the village. No trace, no explanation, just the river, flowing stronger than ever, as if it held within itself the secret of her destiny. Some believed she had become part of the waters, eternal as the river itself. Others, that she still walked between worlds, invisible to the naked eye. But all agreed on one thing: Iara had never truly left. The elders began to tell Iara's story as if it were an ancient legend, even though many still remembered her in the flesh. Around the campfire, the children listened, fascinated to every detail. The young woman who dared to follow the voices of the river,
and in doing so, found a destiny beyond human understanding. Her life became a warning and an inspiration, reminding everyone that silence isn't always absence. Sometimes, it's just a mystery waiting to be heard. Over time, every sound in the forest took on new meaning. When the wind blew through the leaves, they said it was Iara walking among the trees. When the full moon reflected on the river, they believed her eyes still watched over the village, watching over it in silence. Even the birds that sang at dawn were seen as signs of her presence, a reminder that the young woman had never ceased to exist. She had merely changed form. The elders warned that hearing voices in the river could be dangerous, but they also revealed that only the chosen would have the courage to follow them. And to those who dared ask if Iara had been punished or blessed, the answer was always the same: she was neither. She was necessary. Words that echoed more as an enigma than an explanation. Thus, Iara's story spanned generations, carried like an invisible thread connecting the Nairu people to the sacred river. For some, she was the lost guardian. For others, the voice that still resonated in the water. But deep down, no one knew for sure where life ended and legend began. Only one certainty remained: whoever dared listen to the river would never be the same again. And so, Iara's story was not erased by time. She remained like the whisper of the wind among the trees, like the reflection of the moon dancing on the sacred river. For the Nairu, Iara was no longer just the shaman's daughter. She became a symbol of courage, reminding everyone that heeding the call of the unknown requires both risk and wisdom. Her journey taught us that sometimes we must traverse fear to discover the truth hidden in the deep waters of life. The elders still repeat that the river never forgets, and that every choice leaves invisible marks on the people's destiny. Iara became part of this eternal flow, guardian of a secret that cannot be explained in words. And each time someone approaches the river and feels their heart race, they remember that perhaps Iara's voice still echoes, inviting the brave to listen. This isn't just a legend, it's also a warning. Not all silence is empty. Not all mystery should be feared. There are stories that exist to awaken in us the memory that we are part of something greater, something that connects us to the invisible. And in remembering Iara, the Nairu people also remember themselves. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment. This way, you can continue following other legends that, like this one, traverse time to reach us. Because deep down, those who listen to a story also become its guardian.